when we speak about risk assessments, probably worth me sharing my screen just now. So 2 seconds. I'll share that one now. Go into that, and then we'll go into presentation. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now with the title Risk Assessments. So when we talk about risk assessments, I'm imagining it can sound quite scary, especially if you've probably not done risk assessments before. Okay. Risk assessments, when I first started to do them, they were scary. I didn't really know what to expect. I was in a little bit actually thrown into the deep end, and it was all these templates, all this stuff to look at, and it was a little bit daunting. So I'll be honest, that was how I was feeling with it all. But fortunately enough, I didn't have, unfortunately at the time, I didn't have a resource like Leadership Academy to take me through this, like you guys will. So what I'm going to say before we dive into this is keep an open mind. Don't be scared about risk assessments. And we're going to keep it nice and short, nice and simple, so you're able to at least get the knowledge of risk assessments. And then you can develop that later on as you will start to use them a little bit more. Okay, so it's not going to be massive iceberg type stuff. It's going to be everything that you need in order to get you started. Keeping it nice and simple. Okay, so perfect. All right, so what is a risk assessment? So the simplest way of thinking about it is a careful examination of what in your work or project could cause harm, so that you can weigh up whether you have taken enough precautions or should do more to eliminate or prevent harm. Okay, so in this little paragraph is talking about harm. What in your project or work could cause harm? You can weigh up whether you've taken enough precautions or should do more to prevent or eliminate harm. Okay. Now, when we think about risk assessments, we're probably thinking about people in our projects. So what's the risk to me? What's the risk to you? But what we're going to look at today is a risk assessment that covers, in this context, your whole project. So for me as a youth worker in the YMCA, I work with people. So a lot of my risk assessments are going to be focused on working alongside people. So what is the risk to me? What is the risk to that person if I work with them on a one-to-one? Because I am a worker, I'm a youth worker within YMCA Tayside. For my boss, or let's say the chief executive or the national general secretary, however you want to look at it, somebody that's maybe got more of an oversight, this is the type of risk assessment that we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at risk completely. Okay, so the risk to people, the risk to the organization, the risk financially, and the risk to groups and so on. We'll go over it. Okay, so let me just make sure I can see everything on my screen. So, key reasons why risk assessments are done. 2 seconds, I just want to make sure I'm able to see everything because at the moment it's not quite working. Okay, so you can read it off the screen. We do risk assessments for legal, moral, financial reasons, make sure that you're successful, and for sustainability reasons. So Olga just went through some of the feedback from the previous sessions, and I wrote down, as Olga was talking, that risk assessments relate to sustainability. And hopefully you'll be able to see that connection as we go through this slideshow. So legal, remember, this is not just you looking at a risk assessment based off a worker. This is us looking at risk assessments from the top down, so to speak. So you're looking at everything about your project, not just the people that you're working with. It's also, you're doing it in the context of YMCA Finland, or YMCA Italy, or whatever it may be. So legal, does your project do any harm to the organization or the people within it? Okay, because there's a legal aspect to the work that you're going to be doing. Moral, some people may not really use this word every now and then, but does your project knowingly put people in harm's way? So if that's the case, and we'll go on to how we measure risk, but if that's the case, why are you doing that project if it's knowingly putting people in harm's way? Also, financially, is your project worth investing in? So if I am the big boss of YMCA Tayside, and I'm thinking about a project that I want to maybe bring to the organization, but if I deliver this project, it's actually going to cause more harm to my organization than it's actually going to do good. It's going to deplete the funds. It's going to deplete all of our reserves if we try to deliver this. It's actually causing more harm. And what I mean by reserves is a term that we use. It's money put aside that's maybe not used all the time. So there's a financial risk as well when you're doing your projects. Is it actually going to cause more financial harm? Is it actually worth investing in? Is it going to cost a lot of money, but actually not have the payoff, which means it's maybe not a good risk to take. Successful, can your project realistically achieve its planned impacts? As if it's not, then again, you need to be asking yourself, how can I either overcome this? Why am I doing it? And so on. Can your project realistically achieve its planned impacts? And sustainable, just the last one. Will the impact of your project last even past the due date? Now, we've talked a little bit about sustainability already. What I've noticed, just personal experience with working with donors, working with funders, is they're always looking for, yes, this is a good project, but is it sustainable? Is it going to have a lasting impact even past the 1 year that we're going to give you this money for? So if your project is all good in 1 year, is it actually going to, what's going to happen after that? What's the impact after the project? Is there a risk that the project and the work is going to be meaningless after that, let's say that 1 year that a funder has given you money for, or a donor has given you funds for? So when we look at risk assessments, we're looking at the legal aspect, the moral aspect, the financial aspect. Is it a success, and will it be successful, and is it sustainable? We're not just focusing on here on just the people aspect. We're focusing on a lot more. Does that make sense so far? If so, maybe give me a thumbs up. And if not, I don't know, give me a thumbs down, as harsh as that may seem. Okay, we're seeming to be doing okay just now. Just for myself, I realize that some of this may be alien to you guys. It might be completely new. It's still good to understand some of the theory and at least hear it. And then you can go away as we do and kind of absorb it in your own time. So I'm not expecting everybody to be able to understand this straight away because it can take time. We all learn differently. Okay. So risk assessment themes. Risks from external environments, and then we're going to go on to internal environments. Okay. So where are your risks coming from? External environments and internal. So for external, we've got politics. These are only some that we've that I've brought up now. We've got politics, social and cultural trends, economics, health, and technology as some examples here. Politics is a change of power, revolutions. That's a national and oh, sorry, 2 seconds. Closing and NGOs. So that these are risks that could happen that you can think about when you're putting in risk assessments or reviewing risks as part of your projects. These might not apply to your work, but it's still worthwhile keeping them going through it and keeping it in mind. Social and cultural trends are stuff like an aging population, an educational system, traditions, beliefs. All of these may apply to your projects, they may not, but it's still worth to keep in mind the things happening around you, how may that present as a risk to what you are trying to achieve. Economics, unemployment, currency, low income families, lack of transport, and so on, so forth. There's a few things you can go on here. But if you're trying to deliver a project, but you're within a, let's say, an area with a lot of kind of low income, does this present a risk to the to you achieving your planned goals, your the expectations of the project, and if so, how can you overcome that? It may need to be slightly changing how you go about delivering your project. But the whole idea of this is that you are assessing risks and you are implementing changes where you can. Okay, and we'll come on to measuring it later on. Health. Simple one, obviously, infections like COVID. If I take the United Kingdom, for example, if you're delivering a project, and I think there was a question here last time we met, if you're delivering a project that requires 50 people to meet together in a big church hall, COVID probably won't allow that. The risk of health currently isn't probably going to allow that to happen, certainly not in the UK, as we're limited, I think, in youth work to up to 25 young people and then possibly, let's say, 5 staff or something. So when you're looking at risk, think about health as well. Again, aging population, cold and flu seasons, the weather, all of that may come into play when you're looking at assessing risk. Technology, digital world, reliance on internet connections, lack of devices, all of this as well may come into play when you are looking at risk as well. So those are the external factors, but we move on to the internal factors as well. This revolves around people, governance, property, overall management, communication, and probably more, but we won't go into it all today. So similar to the last one for people, it is the motivation, not enough staff, illness, conflict of ideas. You may bring a group together, but actually a risk is that not everybody is on board, which means that you had a plan to start your project in, I don't know, February next year, but there's a risk that people aren't on board. So that may actually delay your project or put your project right back to what's it called? The drawing board, so to speak, where you need to relook at that. Obviously, we're all human. We lose motivation. That's a risk that some people may, you may want to identify. How do you overcome that risk? Let's have some energizers. Let's have a lot of kind of warm-up sessions, making sure the message, your aim, your goal is communicated. People are on board with your vision, and you're tackling the lack of motivation because you identified it as a risk. How do you overcome that? Some projects may seem not as exciting as others. How do you get people working on your project compared to others? How do you recruit volunteers? All of this is stuff that you can look into when you're working with people. Governance is risk with that is there may be a changing governance process, time allocated, somebody again changing their mind, which may impact your project. Property is that you may just not have a venue to deliver your project in. The venue may actually be the only place you could get is actually really old and the roof is about to collapse in. Are you going to choose to deliver your project there? Which goes back to, are you knowingly putting people in harm's way. So if they say this place is available, if you want to use this place, fine, but the roof may collapse in if there's a little bit of wind, why would you choose that? You'll need to obviously overcome that risk in order to deliver your project by probably getting a different venue. Damage, price to hire, all of these things you can take into account when looking at that. Overall management, conflict, change of mind, motivation, time, all relates to that as well. Communication, low attendance, lack of experience, don't have the right equipment in order to take part. All of these are things that you can keep in mind. Now, hopefully you can see from this is that you can go into quite a bit of detail identifying different risks, and you can spend a lot of time looking at, okay, well, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And you can spend all day creating this massive list. But when it comes to risk assessments, keep them quite specific to what you're doing. If you are going to be delivering a project on, I don't know, something that revolves you working in an office, but in your risk assessment, you have got a risk of bear attacks. That could be a risk if there's bears in your city, but really, is that realistic to the work that you're actually going to be doing? So you see what I mean? Keep it specific, keep it related to the work that you're actually going to be doing. How likely is it that this is actually going to happen? Maybe it is likely. We'll come on to how you can identify that. Makes sense so far? Hopefully it does. But as I said, this will be available for you guys to go over and digest in your own time and speak with your linked person. Okay. When looking at risk assessments, it's a 5-point system for implementing a risk assessment. And I'll only spend a little bit of time on this because we're going to go on to other stuff a little bit more practical in the short time that we've got. But first of all, you want to identify the hazards. You want to identify the risk. So what is it? Is it that bear attack? Is it the roof damage? Is it that you've got a possibility of a lack of motivation? What is the risk? You want to identify that. Then you're going to decide who might be harmed and how. So remember, we're looking at it from a top-down view. So you're not just looking at it, is John possibly going to be harmed because he's leading a group, or is Adam going to get a paper cut because he's working at a printer? You're going to be looking at it from the whole kind of aspect of financial. How is this going to impact me financially? How is it going to impact the organization's reputation? How is it going to impact people's health, whatever it may be? You're looking at all of that. So decide who might be harmed and how. Evaluate the risk and decide on precautions. I put that in red because we're going to focus a little bit on this as we move on. But how do you measure it? How do you decide what to do if? So if there is likely going to be a bear attack, how do you overcome that? Or how do you eliminate or reduce that risk from happening? I should say at this point, the risk assessment slide was going to be a lot more complicated than it is just now. So I think I toned it down a little bit when we started to look at what we needed to get across. But we'll look at evaluating risks and deciding on precautions. You obviously want to record your findings and then implement them. So if you found this is a risk, it's a fairly low risk, but we can eliminate this risk by doing this. You want to record that and then go and do the action of eliminating that risk. The simple one that I tend to use as an example is you're walking on a path, a woodland path with, let's say, a group, and there's a tree or a log or whatever it may be that has fallen on your path. That presents a risk because some people may trip and fall on that log. The worst case scenario is somebody let's say, trips, falls, and maybe breaks a leg or breaks an arm. So how do you prevent that? Well, the simplest way to do it is move that log or move the tree stump or whatever it may be that's blocking your way if you can do that. What are you doing by doing that? You're eliminating that risk. Okay. So you've evaluated it, you decided on precautions, you've recorded it, and then you've implemented your findings by actually doing the actions to eliminate it if you can. Risk assessments are what we call fluid documents, which means that they don't just get done once and then filed away and never seen again. Risks change, things change. Our government had risk assessments for working for all of us and working in the places that we work as public. But then COVID happened and we needed to change our risk assessments. We needed to put in social distancing and so on. So all of the health secretaries and all of the people that deal with this type of stuff, the public health, would have brought out their risk assessments and would have reviewed it and updated it based off the new risks that they found. In this example, COVID. So for you guys, if things change, bring out your risk assessments and change things as things go along. You always want to review them. I would normally say you can review them about 6 months after they're done. Some funders, donors, people that are putting expectations on may say, please review your risk assessments every 3 months, maybe every 12 months, whatever it is. But just know that these are fluid documents. Okay. Right. Measuring risk. Okay. This might seem a little bit complicated, but I'll talk you through it because when I first saw it, I was like, a lot of colors. I like colors, but how does this work? It's actually fairly simple. So when you're measuring risk, you've got this point right here. Am I able to use a pointer? How fun is that? Look at that. Can you see that? Yeah? Sweet. Amazing. Okay, so you've got the likelihood rating. You've got rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain it's going to happen. Then you've got the consequences. What is the maximum reasonable consequence? Remember the log in your path example. What's the worst case scenario? Somebody tries to step over that, they trip, they fall, they break a leg, they've spent 3 days in the hospital, whatever it may be. So this is measuring what is the maximum reasonable consequence. Is it insignificant? Is it minor? Is it moderate? Is it quite major? And is it catastrophic, like, oh my goodness, okay? So you're just using, I've forgotten what the fancy English word is for that, but you're just measuring it. So if you've got something that you judge to be a possible risk, but you actually think that the maximum reasonable consequence, the worst case scenario, is actually quite moderate, you would go possible to moderate and you would land on medium. So when you're measuring your risk, no matter what it is, or whatever you are looking at, you would say that this risk I judge to be a medium risk based off this scale. It is possible, and the worst case scenario is sitting at quite moderate. Okay, we say that will then mean it's a medium risk rather than it being low, rather than it being high, rather than it being extreme. Okay, so let's go back to the log example. You're walking down a path, you've got a tree log in front of you. If you deem that to be likelihood of happening that somebody's going to trip and fall, it's almost certain if we try climb over this log in our path that somebody's going to trip and fall. The worst case scenario is that it's catastrophic. So if you're dealing with people, let's say the worst case scenario is that it is quite morbid, but it's death. You would deem it to be almost certain that something's going to happen. And the worst case scenario is that it's catastrophic. In that case, for people is the loss of life. It's extreme. Okay, so the risk we're measuring as very, very high, extreme. Okay, so it goes down to the question of why are you doing it? Why are you doing that? Can you completely eliminate it? If you can't, why are you putting people in the harm's way? Why are you putting that, why are you allowing that risk to happen? Maybe you need to change your project, your approach, whatever it may be. Does this make sense so far? You can see I'm enjoying the pointer action, but does it make sense? Maybe give me a thumbs up if you're okay with this kind of model. Yeah, nice one. Okay, thank you. All right, so here are some examples of measuring risk. And we're going to go through a couple of examples ourselves. So you've got a risk identified as equipment failure. My laptop stops working. You've got personal injury. Somebody is going to get injured. Well site sabotage, loss of digital data, data log of failure. Okay. The likelihood and severity. So what is the worst case scenario and how likely is this going to happen? Equipment failure, likelihood, it's fairly medium. It could happen, it may not happen. Severity, what happens if your laptop stops working? You're judging it as being fairly low because I can maybe just go get another laptop. I can switch to an iPad, whatever it may be. The plan is, if that happens, in this example, is you can contact these people, whoever these people are. It's just ripped from the internet as an example, or you can go out and you can seek a repair, or the plan is use spare laptop, change to iPad available, whatever it may be, and that works specific to your project. Okay. Personal injury, this could always happen. Likelihood, somebody's judged it as pretty low. Severity, it can be fairly high. Remember, this is using a scale beforehand. The plan of action to eliminate it is that members are trained in risk management and wilderness first aid. If it occurs, seek medical attention. Make sure you've got a mobile phone on you to call the ambulance. Make sure somebody's first aid trained, I think is mentioned. Other stuff that you can put in place to reduce the risk. Okay. If the risk is too high, you can just either not do that, or you can try to eliminate it altogether. Okay. So, based off these two slides, measuring the risk and looking at how we can put it into a wee table, this is an example of how you can do that yourselves. This is an example maybe more so related to working with people. Okay, so you've got the hazard, anything that may cause harm. Who might be harmed? Think of everybody involved. So you've got your team, your volunteers, your people walking on the side of the road, whatever it may be near your activity. Think of everybody that could be harmed. Existing controls, what is in place already? How can you reduce what's in place already to reduce harm? Stuff like maybe handrails, other stuff that people may have in place already. Measuring risk, again, worst case scenario, likelihood. What can you do to reduce the risk even more? So if you've identified, I can go and move the log, well then let's go and move the log. When are you going to do that by? Who's going to do it? And when was it done? So this is an example of headlines that you can use if you're, let's say, putting a risk assessment in place specific to people. But I'm giving you these examples like this one, and I'm giving you this example, and I'm giving you that example. But depending on your funders, depending on your donors, they may have something completely different to this. They may use a completely different matrix. So this isn't the be all and end all. And especially for the people who have done risk assessments already, you've probably seen templates different to ones that I've maybe shown you today. But I think what's important here is to just kind of understand, let's start really questioning a lot of the stuff about our projects and where things could go wrong. And if things can go wrong, how can we eliminate that risk or reduce the risk? And if you can, when are you going to do that by? Whose responsibility is it? And when did you do it? Okay.